Hi, in this video I will tell you about a murder case between a wife and husband. So, let's start.
Pastor Matthew Harlow was a man who had built his life on trust and devotion. As the leader of the Faithwood Church in Houston, he was known for his charisma, humility, and unwavering faith. His sermons inspired many, and his ability to connect with his congregation made him a beloved figure in the community. His wife, Evelyn, was equally admired for her. They had 2 children, a teenage daughter named Lalala and a young son, Ben, both of whom were often seen helping around the church, embodying the wholesome Christian values that Matthew preached. However, behind the polished image of the perfect family lay a darker truth. Evelyn's mother, Xually Foster, had recently lost her husband to illness and, unable to afford her own place, moved in with the Harlow family. Xually was a woman of graceful presence in her late 60s, yet with an air of vitality that defied her age. Her beauty was timeless, with sharp features and a mysterious aura that made her stand out in any crowd. While Evelyn welcomed her mother into their home, she was oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. It didn't take long for Xually and Matthew to grow close. What started as a comforting companionship turned into something neither had anticipated. Xually's elegance and maturity seemed to offer something that Evelyn, in her busy role as wife and mother, could not. She had a keen understanding of Matthew's pressures, often offering advice or simply providing an escape from the constant demands of his ministry. She would often invite him to have late-night talks about his struggles, and over time their conversations became more intimate. Matthew found himself drawn to Xually, not just for her wisdom, but for her physical presence as well. At first, he justified his growing feelings for her as merely a form of emotional support. He told himself it was harmless, nothing more than the kindness of an older woman who understood him better than anyone else. But soon their late-night meetings turned into something far more dangerous. The boundaries they once maintained slipped away, and their relationship transformed into a passionate and secretive affair. Xually, though older, was still a woman full of desires and unspoken yearnings. She, too, found herself captivated by Matthew's intensity, his powerful presence, and the sense of importance he held in the community. Matthew knew that what he was doing was wrong. He had promised Evelyn, and by extension his God, that he would remain faithful. Yet each encounter with Xually left him feeling conflicted, as though something deep inside him was craving more. Despite his guilt, there was a magnetic pull between them that neither could resist. The affair remained their secret, hidden behind the closed doors of their home, shielded from Evelyn's watchful eyes. But as time passed, the affair became more than just an emotional escape for both Matthew and Xually. It became an all-consuming force. Their once subtle connection deepened into something far more perilous. One fateful day, Xually discovered she was pregnant. The shock of the revelation rocked their already unstable world. Xually's pregnancy was a ticking time bomb, one that threatened to expose everything they had worked so hard to hide. Matthew's carefully constructed life, the church, his family, his reputation, was at risk of crumbling, and he knew there was no way to undo what had already been done. As the months passed, the tension between Matthew and Xually became palpable. Xually's pregnancy was a secret they both struggled to keep hidden. While she did her best to maintain a facade of normalcy, something had shifted within the Harlow household. Evelyn began to notice small changes in her mother's behavior. Xually, once the picture of grace and poise, had become more distant, her usual warmth replaced with an uneasy coldness. She began withdrawing from family activities, often citing fatigue as an excuse. Evelyn, concerned but too trusting, attributed it to the stresses of adjusting to life after her husband's death. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Matthew found himself caught in a web of guilt and fear. He had always prided himself on his moral integrity, his faithfulness to God, and his commitment to his family. But the secret affair with Xually was tearing him apart. He had always been careful to maintain his image as the righteous and upstanding pastor, the guiding light of Faithwood Church. But his relationship with Xually was a dark secret, one that threatened to destroy everything he had worked for. Yet each time they met in the shadows, he could not resist her. The strain began to show on him. His once calm and composed demeanor became increasingly erratic. He became irritable, distracted during sermons, and distant with his congregation. The whispers of suspicion started to spread. Daniel Cruz, a longtime church member and a keen observer of human behavior, noticed the subtle interactions between Matthew and Xually. He began to connect the dots, watching as Xually grew more secretive, and Matthew appeared to be avoiding his wife more frequently. Though he had no concrete evidence, Daniel's instincts told him something was terribly wrong. He began to quietly observe them, making mental notes of every exchange, every strange occurrence that seemed out of place. Evelyn, though increasingly uneasy, didn't yet know the full extent of her husband's betrayal. She chalked up his odd behavior to the pressure of his ministry and the toll it took on him. However, a nagging sense of doubt began to creep into her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her mother's presence in their home was somehow contributing to the growing distance between her and Matthew. She began to question whether she truly knew her husband as well as she thought. She would often catch him staring at Xually, his gaze lingering just a little too long, or see them exchanging awkward forced smiles in the hallways. One evening after dinner, Evelyn noticed that Xually seemed unusually pale. When she asked her mother if everything was all right, Xually brushed it off with a smile, claiming she was simply feeling a bit tired. But there was a certain unease in her eyes that Evelyn couldn't ignore. As days went on, Xually's condition worsened. Her pregnancy became more visible, and she seemed to retreat into herself as though trapped in a world of her own. Evelyn, still unaware of the true nature of the situation, began to worry about her mother's health. Matthew, too, was becoming increasingly anxious. Xually's pregnancy could no longer be hidden, and the situation was spiraling out of control. He could feel the walls closing in on him. His desire to maintain his family's perfect image was driving him to the brink of madness. As the pressure mounted, he realized that something had to be done. But what? Would he confess everything to Evelyn, destroy his family and face the consequences of his actions? Or would he find a way to cover up the truth before it was too late? Each passing day brought him closer to a breaking point, and the fear of exposure gnawed at him constantly. The facade he had so carefully constructed was about to shatter, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The day Xually Foster disappeared began like any other. The sun rose over the quiet suburban streets of Houston, casting a warm glow on the small family home where the Harlows lived. Evelyn had spent the morning preparing breakfast for the family and organizing church materials for her husband. She expected Xually to join them for the meal, but when the clock ticked past their usual time for breakfast, Evelyn became concerned. Xually had always been punctual, especially when it came to family routines. After a few more hours passed with no word from her mother, Evelyn called her cell phone, but there was no answer. A sense of unease began to settle in her chest. She asked Matthew if he had seen Xually, but he too seemed surprised. His face tightened, as though a flicker of fear crossed his mind. He assured Evelyn that Xually was likely just out for a walk, or perhaps taking some time to herself, but the longer Xually remained unaccounted for. The more Evelyn's anxiety grew by afternoon, the family became frantic. Xually's car was still parked in the driveway, and there was no sign of her anywhere in the house. Evelyn searched every room, calling out her mother's name in a mix of confusion and growing panic. Matthew, always the calm one, suggested they contact the police. He put on his best face for the authorities when they arrived, but deep down, he was consumed by a fear that the secret he had spent months hiding was about to be exposed. Detective Andrea Langston, a seasoned investigator with a sharp mind, quickly took charge of the case. She began questioning Evelyn about Xually's disappearance, asking about any potential issues Xually had been dealing with. Evelyn, though devastated, recalled that her mother had seemed unusually withdrawn in recent weeks, but she had attributed it to the stresses of her health and the move to the Harlow home. Evelyn had no idea that Xually's life was steeped in more complicated matters. As the hours turned into days, Detective Langston and her team scoured the area, following every possible lead. The search became an all-consuming effort, but Xually remained nowhere to be found. It wasn't until the third day, when a group of hikers stumbled upon a body in a remote section of wooded land on the outskirts of Houston, that the mystery began to unfold in a shocking way. The discovery was grisly. Xually's body was found just off a narrow trail, hidden from view by thick underbrush. The area was eerily quiet, as though it had been chosen deliberately to keep the crime hidden. The scene was brutal, with deep, jagged wounds on her neck, indicating she had been violently attacked. Her clothes were torn, and there were signs of a struggle in the surrounding dirt. Detective Langston's experienced eyes immediately noted the chilling details. This wasn't a simple disappearance. This was a murder. But what struck the investigators as most disturbing was the realization that Xually had been very close to giving birth. A blood-soaked sheet clutched in her hand suggested that she had tried to protect herself, but it was too